Karoline Leavitt, the rising star in the world of American politics, was known for her sharp rhetoric and no-nonsense approach. It wasn't uncommon for her to stir controversy, but this time, things took an unexpected turn. She entered the high-end restaurant, the Sterling, in downtown Boston for a private dinner with friends. Known for its exclusivity and top-tier service, the Sterling was frequented by influential figures. However, what was supposed to be a relaxing evening quickly turned into a scene that would go viral. As Leavitt sat at her table, the restaurant staff seemed unusually tense. Whispers circulated among the diners, but Karoline, ever the professional, continued to enjoy her meal. That is, until the manager approached her table with a stern look. "Ma'am, we need you to leave," the manager said, his voice barely above a whisper, though the tension in the air was palpable. Leavitt raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" she asked, her tone polite but with a clear edge of confusion. "You've been asked to leave. There's been a complaint." Before she could respond, the manager's gaze shifted toward the front door, where a few of the restaurant's patrons stood watching the unfolding drama. Karoline, now visibly irritated, stood up. "I'm sorry, but I've done nothing wrong." "Are you serious right now?" The manager, trying his best to remain calm, nodded. "Yes, I'm afraid so." Within moments, Karoline was escorted out of the restaurant. The event, seemingly trivial, would quickly snowball into a political and social media firestorm. Once Karoline was outside, her phone buzzed non-stop. News outlets began picking up the story almost immediately, and before long, her social media exploded. What had been a quiet evening in a restaurant was now a national incident. Her first tweet read, "Tonight, I was kicked out of a Boston restaurant for simply being me." They claimed there was a complaint, but didn't have the decency to explain. This is what happens when you stand up for what's right. Hashtag free speech, hashtag not welcome. The hashtag Karoline kicked out quickly began trending, with both supporters and critics weighing in. Some hailed her as a victim of left-wing intolerance, while others accused her of playing the victim for political gain. Then, hours later, came the bombshell. Karoline posted a video to her followers. "Here's the full story," she began, her voice steady, but with clear frustration. "I was kicked out of a restaurant, not because I was disruptive, but because of who I am and what I stand for. A restaurant that prides itself on welcoming all suddenly found me too controversial to handle. I'm not backing down. And to those who want to silence me, know this, I will keep fighting. Because this is not just about a dinner. This is about silencing voices you don't agree with." The video, though calm and measured, stirred the pot in a way few expected. Her followers, already polarized by her outspoken views, were now enraged on her behalf. Political commentators across the spectrum began weighing in. This was no longer just a restaurant dispute, it had become a political battleground. The incident at the Sterling was only the beginning of the storm. As the days passed, various factions began to take sides. Leavitt supporters rallied around her, arguing that her removal was an attack on free speech and political diversity. Right-wing commentators amplified her message, using the hashtag Karoline kicked out as a rallying cry. On the other side, Leavitt's critics argued that she was once again playing the victim for attention. They pointed out that the restaurant's management had every right to ask anyone to leave, and questioned why she had made such a big deal out of the incident. But the real surprise came when the Sterling released a statement. They explained that the complaint had been lodged by a group of other patrons who felt uncomfortable with Leavitt's presence due to her outspoken political views. The restaurant clarified that the decision to ask her to leave was made out of concern for the comfort and safety of all diners. Karoline's response was swift and unapologetic. "This is a clear attempt to undermine my platform," she wrote. "When you refuse to bow down to political correctness, this is what happens. They want you to shut up, to hide in the shadows. But I won't." As her video continued to spread, it ignited discussions about the boundaries of free speech, political polarization, and the role of businesses in enforcing their own policies. The internet was divided, and soon, the incident was the talk of not only political talk shows but also late-night comedy and news outlets. Everyone had an opinion. And Karoline? She was more determined than ever. The storm she had ignited was only growing, and she knew how to navigate it. Weeks after the incident, Leavitt's political rivals were forced to respond. Some tried to distance themselves from her, hoping the controversy would fade. Others, however, found themselves drawn into the debate, realizing the potential impact on their own campaigns. Karoline had become a political lightning rod, loved by some, loathed by others, but no one could ignore her. Her online following exploded, and donations poured in from supporters who saw her as a champion for free speech and conservative values. Leavitt herself leaned into the controversy, hosting town halls and appearing on numerous political talk shows to further amplify her message. "The left wants to cancel anyone who disagrees with them," she said at one rally. "And it's not just about a restaurant. It's about a fight for our right to speak, to express ourselves, and to stand up for what we believe in." Her words resonated with a broad base of voters who felt increasingly alienated by the political elite. The incident at the Sterling, which initially seemed like a minor personal affront, had turned into a defining moment in her political career. And as the media storm raged on, Karoline Leavitt found herself at the center of a much larger battle, one that would define her future in politics for years to come. Just as Karoline Leavitt's response had fueled her supporters, it also ignited an intense backlash that was impossible to ignore. The Sterling statement had not only cast doubt on her version of events, but it also brought forth a wave of critics who were quick to label her as disingenuous and opportunistic. In a striking development, some of the restaurant's most loyal patrons, well-known donors and influencers, publicly expressed their disappointment. A few even went as far as to say they would never dine at the Sterling again. But this wasn't enough for some political opponents, who used the incident to question Karoline's priorities. "I can't believe this is where our politics are heading. A grown woman is throwing a tantrum over a restaurant issue. It's not about free speech, it's about manipulating the narrative for political gain," tweeted a high-profile liberal politician. The tweet went viral almost immediately, and soon, a hashtag Karoline Exaggerates started circulating, with hundreds of memes and posts mocking her response to the situation. Yet, instead of retreating, Karoline Leavitt used the backlash to her advantage. In her next video, she acknowledged the growing criticism but remained unfazed. "They'll try to twist the story, to make it about anything but the real issue at hand," she said, her voice firm. "But this isn't about one restaurant, or one night. It's about whether or not we can have an honest conversation in this country without being silenced." Her words rang clear in the ears of both her supporters and detractors. To her followers, she had become a symbol of resistance against what they saw as a growing trend of political censorship. To her critics, however, she was an opportunist who had crafted an exaggerated narrative to push her political agenda. As the weeks wore on, her presence in the media didn't wane. Political pundits on both sides of the spectrum debated the implications of the incident. Was it a lesson in standing up for one's beliefs, or a case of manufactured outrage to advance a career? For Karoline, the answer was clear: it was about more than just politics, it was about the personal cost of challenging the status quo. And as the momentum behind her cause continued to build, one thing was undeniable: Karoline Leavitt's career had entered a new phase, where every move she made was watched, scrutinized, and dissected. She had become a political force in her own right, and there was no turning back. But the question remained: would this incident help propel her to greater political heights, or would the constant scrutiny and backlash ultimately prove too much? Only time would tell. As Karoline Leavitt's social media followers swelled, so did the political pressure she faced. The incident at the Sterling had sparked a national conversation on free speech, cancel culture, and political polarization. It was a double-edged sword. On one hand, she had gained a massive following of passionate supporters who saw her as a champion for their cause. On the other hand, the constant criticism, the mockery, and the scrutiny began to take its toll. Her supporters weren't just online warriors, they were showing up at her events, rallying in support of her stance on free speech and individual rights. At one rally in New Hampshire, a crowd of thousands gathered, waving signs that read, "I stand with Karoline," and "Free Speech." Karoline herself stood at the podium, her presence commanding, her resolve unshaken. "Look at the faces here today," she said, addressing the crowd. "This is not about me, this is about the future of our country, the right to speak without fear of being silenced by those who don't agree with us. This is about fighting back against the cancel culture that is tearing apart our nation." The cheers from the crowd were deafening. Her message resonated deeply with those who felt they were often drowned out by louder voices on the left. For them, Karoline wasn't just a politician, she was a voice for the voiceless, someone willing to stand up against a system that seemed increasingly hostile to conservative viewpoints. But the support came with a cost. As Karoline's political capital grew, so did the stakes. More media outlets, both right-leaning and left-leaning, began to dive deeper into her personal history, her political associations, and her actions before the restaurant incident. Reporters dug through old interviews, campaign speeches, and public appearances, hoping to find something they could use to discredit her. One evening, Karoline received a call from a political strategist who had been advising her on her next steps. "Karoline, you need to be careful. They're coming for you. They're trying to paint you as a hypocrite. You've made some enemies, and they're going to use every weapon at their disposal to take you down. It's only going to get uglier from here." Karoline was quiet for a moment, her mind racing through the possibilities. But after a pause, she replied with determination in her voice, "Let them come. I'm not backing down. The fight has only just begun." And with that, she doubled down. The media frenzy surrounding Karoline Leavitt reached its peak when an investigative report was released detailing her political donations, past speeches, and controversial stances on certain issues. Critics pounced on the revelations, accusing her of hypocrisy and inconsistency in her messaging. Headlines screamed about her ties to political donors with questionable motives, and her past actions were scrutinized with a fine-toothed comb. But Karoline was ready. Rather than retreating in the face of mounting attacks, she took to the airwaves. She appeared on national talk shows, where she addressed the criticisms head-on. "I've never been shy about my beliefs, and I stand by every decision I've made," she told a popular host during a live interview. "You want to dig into my past? Fine. But you won't find any skeletons because I've always been transparent about who I am. I'm not the one hiding behind a mask of political correctness." Her unwavering stance won her admiration from her supporters, but it also fueled the fire for those who opposed her. The more she spoke, the more divided the nation became. Every word she said was scrutinized, analyzed, and dissected. The attacks grew fiercer, but so did the support from her loyal base, who saw her as someone unafraid to speak the truth. In the midst of the chaos, an unexpected ally emerged, an influential conservative senator who had long been critical of Leavitt's political approach. In a surprising turn of events, he publicly endorsed her, calling her the future of conservative politics in America. The endorsement sent shockwaves through the media and gave her campaign a significant boost. It was a political endorsement that could not be ignored. With the momentum on her side, Karoline doubled down once again, intensifying her public appearances and media engagements. She had become more than just a candidate, she was now a symbol of the resistance against what she saw as a powerful, out-of-touch political establishment. But with each victory, the pressure mounted. Every step forward seemed to bring new challenges, and the constant spotlight weighed heavy on her shoulders. As the next election season loomed closer, Karoline Leavitt's political future was uncertain. Would the support she had garnered be enough to propel her to higher office? Or would the attacks from her enemies finally take their toll? She was already making plans for her next move. Rumors circulated that she was considering a run for a higher seat in Congress. The prospect of her becoming a major political figure was now a real possibility. But Karoline knew that with this kind of attention, the stakes would only continue to rise. One thing was clear, she wasn't about to let the noise drown her out. No matter what the media or her critics said, Karoline Leavitt was in this fight for the long haul. And as the political world watched closely, it was evident that her story was far from over. In fact, it had just begun. The months leading up to the election were a whirlwind. Karoline Leavitt's name had become a fixture in every political conversation, whether on cable news, social media, or late-night talk shows. She had become a symbol, polarizing, yes, but undeniably influential. Her base of supporters had only grown, feeding off the narrative she had spun about fighting for free speech, against cancel culture, and for a government that listened to ordinary Americans. But the closer the election came, the more the pressure built. Every move she made, every word she said, was dissected. Critics painted her as a political opportunist, willing to sacrifice integrity for a quick rise to power. Her personal life, her finances, her past affiliations, all came under scrutiny. Still, Karoline remained steadfast. She had learned to embrace the attacks as a part of her journey. What once might have shaken her now fueled her resolve. Her message remained the same, she was unapologetically herself, standing for those who felt unheard. But the final straw came during a heated televised debate between her and her most formidable opponent, a seasoned politician with decades of experience. The debate stage was set in front of thousands of viewers, broadcast live, and the nation was watching. As the debate unfolded, the questions grew increasingly pointed. Her opponent, a well-known figure in the establishment, tried to paint her as a puppet for far-right interests, attempting to discredit her every move. Karoline took the hits with grace, but she didn't shy away from the hard truths. At one moment, her opponent accused her of being out of touch with the real issues Americans face, of focusing more on media stunts than on actual policy. The audience waited for her to flinch, to falter. But Karoline, with poise, responded, "Let me tell you something. I've never been more in touch with the people of this country than I am right now. I am not the one hiding behind closed doors, making deals with special interests. I speak directly to the people who feel forgotten, who feel like their voices have been drowned out by the political elite. And I will always fight for them, no matter how many times you try to silence me." The words were powerful, cutting through the noise like a sharp knife. The room went silent for a moment. Then, applause erupted. It was clear that Karoline had won that exchange, but the battle was far from over. Part 10, The Victory. The days after the debate were a blur of media coverage, political commentary, and intense campaigning. The polls fluctuated, but it was undeniable that Karoline had connected with something deep inside the American electorate, a desire for authenticity, for someone who wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo. Election day came, and the nation held its breath. When the results started coming in, it became clear that Karoline Leavitt had done what many thought impossible. Against the odds, against the relentless attacks, she had secured a decisive victory. The news outlets were quick to cover her rise, with some calling it a stunning political upset, while others chalked it up to the undeniable power of her message. Standing on stage, accepting her victory, Karoline's face was calm, but her eyes were full of fire. "This isn't just my victory," she said to the crowd, her voice strong. "This is a victory for every American who feels like their voice doesn't matter. This is a victory for free speech, for standing up for what's right, even when the odds are against you. This is just the beginning." The crowd erupted in cheers. But for Karoline, the battle was far from over. She had won a seat, but the real work was ahead of her. Now, she had the platform to fight even harder for the people who believed in her. The challenges would continue, the attacks would intensify, and the stakes would only grow higher. But as she looked out at her supporters, Karoline knew one thing for sure: she wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. Her journey had only just begun. And the political world, it seemed, would never be the same again.